Mr. President, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
I want to go back a little bit to what you and Nelson Mandela wrought in the late 80s. You see that fantastic and famous picture of yourself and Nelson Mandela holding your hands aloft when you won your Nobel Peace Prize together. And yet, I don't think you're the closest of friends.
Actually, we're close friends, not the closest in the sense that we see each other once a week. Also, we live apart. But he's been in my home as a guest. I've been in his home as a guest. When I go to Johannesburg, my wife and I have had tea with him and Gracia, his wife. No, we call each other on birthdays. There is no animosity left between us. Historically, there was.
What was the historic animosity? For instance, you've been quoted as saying that you disagree with the hagiography that goes around Nelson Mandela these days, that you found him quite a difficult and tough negotiator.
The main cause for the tensions, when there were tensions between us, was the ongoing political violence. His accusations and personal attacks upon me, as if I were responsible for it, as if I were looking away and allowing it to happen, not recognizing the extensive efforts which I made to identify the culprits. So that was the main cause of the tension.
Do you remember the first time you met him?
I remember it very well. He was brought under cover of darkness to my office from the Victor Verster prison. We did not discuss that evening anything of fundamental importance. We were just feeling each other out. I've read, of course, everything I could read about him beforehand. I was well briefed. I was impressed, however, by how tall he was, by the ramrod straightness of his stature, and realized that this is a very special man. He had an aura around him. He still has an aura around him. He is truly a very dignified and a very admirable person.
He once said that he had to convince his colleagues to sit down with the enemy and suppress their feelings about you all.
That's true, as I had to convince some of my supporters in the same vein. But can I say that from the beginning in the negotiations, I realized that he was also a good listener, reaching out to the one speaking, trying to understand what lies behind what was being said. I felt it that first evening. And both of us later wrote in our respective autobiographies. After that very first meeting, we could report back to our constituencies, I think I can do business with this man.
After that very first meeting, and you described this man of dignity, did you have regret in your heart that he had been in jail for nigh on 28 years?
I felt he was in jail much too long. He was...
But was it an injustice?
He was properly tried in front of a properly constituted court. He was represented by the best lawyers, and he was found guilty of what is a crime in the United States, of what is a crime in all developed countries, of treason. He planned, as a young man, to overthrow the government in a violent way. But life sentence in South Africa, that's how I felt when he was convicted as a young lawyer, when I was a young lawyer. But life sentence in South Africa at that stage meant that your release should be considered after about 20 or 21 years. I remember saying to him, the second time I met him, again he came to my office. It was 4 days before his release. And I said, Mr. Mandela, I want to tell you, you will be released on Sunday the 11th. And he said, it's too soon. And I said, why? He said, we need more time for preparation. And I said, Mr. Mandela, you've been in jail too long. You and I will negotiate about many things. But this is not negotiable. You will be released. Now let's negotiate about what time of the day and where do you want to be released. He was in jail too long. The efforts by my predecessor to release him on a conditional basis failed, and I have respect for Mandela's reasons for not saying I will renounce violence at the stage when he was asked to do so, for not saying I will accept going to live in the Transkei, which in our terms was an independent state. He wanted to be released unconditionally. And this is what we did.
He once called you a man of integrity, and then he took that back. He is still very regretful that you yourself have never renounced the principle of apartheid. And many, for instance, on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, those who led it, regret that you did not take or seek amnesty, that you didn't take responsibility for what your party did.
Well, let me firstly say, I'm not aware that Mr. Mandela says I've never renounced apartheid. I have made the most profound apology in front of the Truth Commission and on other occasions about the injustices which was wrought by apartheid. What I haven't apologized for is the original concept of seeking to bring justice to all South Africans through the concept of nation states. But in South Africa it failed. And by the end of the 70s, we had to realize and accept and admit to ourselves that it had failed. And that is when fundamental reform started. But I have made a profound apology for the injustices caused by apartheid.